Hello everyone, we are back with yet another episode of Superannuated Starman. This is episode 46, and I'm sure of it this time. I just checked. I know that was a problem of mine these last few episodes. I'm Sean Ryan, and I'm joined by Cory Braucks. Cory, how you doing?
Yes, hello. Hello, good to see you.
It's good to see you too, man. Unfortunately, Chris can't make it to this recording, but he has recorded some of his thoughts already, so those will be stitched in here. And for everyone out there, first and foremost, I want to apologize for the long time in between releases. I finally finished this portion of my schooling. I finally got my degree and certifications. And then I had some family come to visit. And then on top of that, I had some other family that had some pretty major surgery. So it's been next to impossible to find time to record. So again, I want to apologize to anyone that was waiting on us. And I want to apologize to both you, Cory, and Chris, who wasn't here, for being so busy.
Well, and I would like to also let the viewers know that it is almost 9 o'clock on a Wednesday, and normally we do these like in the afternoon on a Sunday because Chris also had his entire schedule changed, so we had that in the way as well. So it wasn't really completely on you, Sean.
That's true. Like I said, and like I've said many times, life does get in the way. But I want to give a massive thank you to our listeners, especially those of you in Europe. Relatively, we've had almost next to no downloads from the US during our brief hiatus, but our European brothers and sisters have been picking up the slack. So thank you so much. With that out of the way, we can talk about what we're all here for today, and that is video games. This has been a game that I've wanted to cover for a very long time, and I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on it, Cory. Because to me, this is one of the greatest NES games out there. This game needs no introductions, but I'm here to give one anyway. Today we're going to be discussing a cult classic for the Nintendo Entertainment System, Journey to Silius. I don't want to start gushing too early about how amazing I find this game, so let's take our first of what will hopefully be many music breaks so you can take in this amazing soundtrack. Enjoy. Developed and published by Sunsoft, a Japanese video game developer who are no strangers to publishing licensed titles, Journey to Silius actually started its life as a Terminator game, but Sunsoft lost the licensing rights to the film. Sunsoft had actually completed the game its entirety before presenting it to the license holder, who immediately revoked the license because the game strayed so far from the plot of the film and instead focused on a hypothetical plot involving the future war between mankind and Skynet. After losing the license, they had to alter the graphics in the storyline significantly, though there are some elements of the original game that have survived, but there's even more history here. Before the game was a run-and-gun platformer, it was presented at the 1989 Winter Computer Electronics Show, where a 2-minute and 55-second video shows the game not as a platformer, but as an interactive animated game similar in style to Dragon Slayer. I'm going to give you a quote from that video right here.
We're bringing the Terminator back in the biggest way possible, as the very first home video game to feature movie footage and interactive graphics technology. That's right, the same technology that transformed the arcade a few years ago with computer-generated graphics so incredibly realistic, they literally bring games to life. Thanks to the same magic, the Terminator is the most amazingly lifelike home video game you've ever seen.
It did not feature movie footage and was not very realistic, but it was a very ambitious project, perhaps too ambitious because it was scrapped due to the memory constraints of the NES. Whereas this alpha build of the game focused on the events of the film, they decided to move in another direction plot-wise, as I said, and as a result, lost the license. Unfortunately, no prototypes of this game or the Terminator platformer build are known to exist, and all that has survived is the video I previously mentioned, in a brief preview featured in the July-August 1989 volume of Nintendo Power. While the game was undergoing revisions after losing the license, the title of the game was changed to Operation SSS, and the game eventually did release in North America in September of 1990, but under the title Journey to Silius. It would also release in Japan that same year, but under the name Rough World. In the North American version, the character had his entire face exposed, but this was changed in all other region, where the character wore armored clothing covering his entire body, including his head and face. And a quick note, the Japanese cover looks sick as hell, but I don't want to discount too much from the North American box art, which features a hand-drawn skyline, but also prominently features graphics ripped directly from the game, which was pretty rare in those days. I don't have a lot of info on this guy, but I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention the creative genius behind the music. The soundtrack was composed by Nokai Kodaka, a former composer at Sunsoft who retired from video game music composition in 2002 to become a professor of music at the Nagaya College of Music in Japan. Kodaka worked on Batman, Return of the Joker, Fester's Quest, Gremlins 2 The New Batch, just to name a few, and while they may not all be outstanding games, especially in the case of Fester's Quest, the soundtracks certainly are. So that's a shorter history segment than most games that we've covered, but I think I did hit on some interesting points in this game's development. With that, let's take another break, and when we return, we'll discuss our memories of Journey to Silius. Welcome back, everybody. This segment is going to be our memories from our childhood. Unfortunately, none of us have actual childhood memories, and in fact, I'm the only one that has any memories of this game at all before a couple of months ago.
I'm not sure this game really exists.
Oh, it definitely exists. But before I talk about Journey to Silius, I have a pretty lengthy story to it, and I'm going to apologize up front. And in fact, I'm not even going to talk about Journey to Silius just yet because I did own a Terminator game on the NES. It was developed by Radical Entertainment, who put out some absolute bangers like Mario is Missing and Mario's Time Machine. But they eventually did release some games that were pretty good, like Simpsons Hit and Run and Prototype 1 and 2. But this game, the Terminator, just absolutely sucked. It was bad. There's no other way to say it. You start off as Kyle Reese, who's the guy that returns from the future to protect Sarah Connor, and you're running around in a sewer level within seconds of putting the cart in your NES. And I never got very far because it was just very, very hard, and it just sucks.
Do you know what a great Terminator game is?
Are you talking about T2 the arcade?
Yeah, T2 Judgment Day for the arcade.
Yeah, that game is phenomenal.
Midway did such a good job with that game. We should talk about that.
That'd be pretty difficult to put together, but yeah, that game is phenomenal. But on to Journey of Silius. I didn't own this game during my childhood. In fact, I'd never even heard of it, and I wish that I had had this game instead of that Terminator game that I did own. It wasn't until I was in my early 20s when I really started to get into video game collecting that I was frequenting major video game forums and checking out top 100 lists, not only to see if the games that I personally loved made the cut, but to fill in the gaps in my own video game knowledge, so to speak, and see what was out there. And that led me to Journey to Silius. It was on one of those hidden gem lists. In fact, it was on several. But to me, it looked like just any other side-scrolling shooter, Contra, Mega Man, Bionic Commando. There's a ton of them. And this didn't look special in comparison. And it wasn't until I watched some gameplay videos on YouTube and I thought the gameplay looked solid, but then I heard the music and my jaw just dropped. I couldn't believe that this game had a soundtrack this good. And I knew that I had to hunt it down. At this point in my life, it's 2009. I'm 25. I just bought my first house, and the retro video game scene in this area, I was stationed in Missouri. It was just non-existent. It wasn't until months later that I finally made some friends that were also into video games, but not to the extent that I was. But one of them happened to know of a retro video game shop that was about 45 minutes away from our base. We all piled into my car and headed off, and this shop was in the middle of absolute nowhere. And if it wasn't for MapQuest, I never ever would have found it. But this guy had so much. It was just this untapped goldmine of games and systems and just video game memorabilia, a lot of which was just still in the box, brand new. And I spent a ton of money that first trip. And after that, I started going back every so often to see if this guy had any new stuff in.
Dude, it's so weird how like some of those retro game stores just are like exist in the middle of nowhere. Like I remember growing up, I'm from the Twin Cities, and there's a place like Red Wing, Minnesota. And so it's maybe like an hour out of town or whatever it is, but it looks like a bait shop. It's just this old like beat up barn style building, and it's got like a tin roof, and you get in there and there's like mint condition cartridges of like The Legend of Zelda and all these other titles, and you're just like, whoa, look at all this crap in here. And it's like, where did this come from?
You would have thought this place was an abandoned building by the look of it. It was just rough. But on one of those return trips, I came back and the owner was just sorting through tons of totes, just stacks and stacks of them. And I asked what was up. And he said that a guy showed up the day before and told him that he had his entire collection in a U-Haul. And the owner told him that he couldn't afford to buy it off of him. And the guy said that he was getting married, and a condition of marriage was that his fiance wanted him to get rid of his entire gaming collection. So just like that, he just gave it to him.
And now that's worth like $500,000 on eBay.
Just an ungodly amount of money. He just unloaded it and drove off. And now the shop owner that already had a ridiculous amount of stuff that looking back was rare then and obscene now, had just doubled his inventory overnight. And I asked him if I could dig through it, and it didn't take me long to find all the NES stuff. And as I was looking, I found it. Journey to Silius, complete in box and in just amazing condition. I asked him how much, and he told me that I could just have it, and that I'd already spent enough in his shop, and that game cost him nothing to obtain, so it was mine, free of charge.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I was pretty damn stoked, and I took it home and I played the hell out of it. And while I never beat it back then, I did get pretty good at it, and I could run through the first couple of levels without even getting hit. But it was those later stages that I obviously couldn't or didn't practice enough that I struggled with. And yeah, that's my history with the game. While I don't have any childhood memories, and let me tell you, I wish I did. I do have that memory of getting that very first copy, and it's something that I will never forget. That's all I've got. Corey, is there anything you want to add before we move on to our modern playthrough?
Yeah, Terminator 2 is a great game.
You're still on a T2?
Dude,
The arcade?
Midway did such a good job with that title.
Yeah, it was phenomenal.
And the controller was amazing. You had a giant machine gun for a controller.
Yeah, it really tapped into every like childhood fantasy, you know? And that was just having this massive gun right there in your shoulder.
Yeah, and the
just
grenade
mowing
launcher
down-
was like up on the barrel, and you hit the button and it went dunk.
So good. So good. Getting away from Terminator, because this isn't a Terminator game, even though it used to be, let's take another break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about our modern playthrough of Journey to Silius. Chris, how about you talk a bit about your playthrough? And after that, I'm going to have a couple of questions for you.
This was an incredibly difficult game that I used lots and lots of save states on. And the bosses are insane, and the transitions between like the phases are crazy, and like you knew I was using save states. And I asked you about using save states, if you used them or not. And you were like, "Oh yeah, I've gotten up so far or whatever." I can't remember what you said. But I was like, all right, my goal is to get through the first 2 levels without using any save states. And I couldn't beat the second level. I finally beat the first level, which it's been a minute. Isn't the first level boss, isn't that the helicopter?
Yes, the first stage boss is called the helicopter. The second stage boss is known as the war vehicle robot.
Yes, the tank that reminded me of, I don't know why, it reminded me of Super Mario 3. Stage 8.
No, I can totally see what you're talking about there.
Except it's just trying to destroy you. I couldn't. Oh wait, no, I did. Come to think, I think I did beat that, and then immediately died on stage 3. But I beat that, and that was my goal. Without save states, was that I made it through the first 2 stages without any save states. But I did, cheesing the hell out of save states. I did beat the game originally, and oh my gosh, those boss levels are insane. Like when people talk about, how hard games were when we were kids, and like how they punish you, and this is one of those games. This was incredibly difficult. I could not imagine playing this as a kid on the NES.
Which level or boss did you find to be the hardest out of all of them? And then I have a follow-up question to that.
The one boss that I thought was a pretty big struggle there towards the end, it was that floating fortress that you had to like go under and dodge the torches. And
so the bosses in order,
thank you, this will help,
are stage 1 helicopter, which I mentioned, stage 2 war vehicle robot, stage 3 is troops of cannons, 4 is mammoth cannon, 5 is a 2-parter, the giant Exodus spaceship, and then the final boss, spoilers, is the android.
the spaceship one. spaceship has what, 3 different sections basically, but then you have to repeat them. And the first section is you have to jump and damage, like, wasn't it like I don't know, like the cockpit, the shuttle, where the gun is shooting from?
Yeah, there's a spot that you have to shoot at, and next to it is what looks like a rolling eyeball, even though it's not. It's just a circle with a dot in it that will spin around and then randomly fire at
so
you.
while it's doing that, while you're having to do that, you can only do it by jumping and timing your shots just right. But then you also have to avoid projectiles that are coming at you. And then once you blow up that little section, then you have to wait for the spaceship to raise, and then you have to run underneath it through the little,
like exhaust ports or something like that.
I
can't remember definitively exactly what happens there, but I think that you have to kind of dodge some of the ports that are, I don't know if it's exhaust or fire or something like that, but there's still some stuff that you have to dodge.
Sean, if I may.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so basically what Chris is talking about, there's the spaceship battle at the end, and it's essentially this long tube spaceship, and there's cockpits on either side of it, and you have this window where you can shoot the cockpit, and then it starts like slowly floating over you, and its thrusters are like coming out, and you have to like time it to duck underneath the thrusters before you get burned.
And you have to like stop in a certain spot so you don't get squished again. But I was not expecting that as a boss fight, which was really like, because all the other vehicular, mechanical bosses that you're going against, but this thing was, the thing was like 3 screen stages long, where you beat the one the one cockpit, and then you have to scroll over like 3 different screens as it shifts over, and then beat the other side, and then go back, beat the other side, and then didn't you have to go back twice, back and forth? You had to kill 4 different or the 2 cockpits 2 times each, I think, right?
I honestly can't remember.
But yeah, that was the boss fight that stood out to me the most, and I don't even remember the Android one.
Well, he's right after, essentially, but yeah, he's right after you defeat that boss.
But yeah, this was a seriously hard game.
So my follow-up question is, whenever you got a new gun, did you use it throughout the level, or did you wait until the boss?
I saved it for the boss and then used it for the boss. That's not true. Isn't there one stage where you have to use it for? I can't remember. But for the most part, yeah, no, I saved all the energy for the boss and then used it at the boss. Especially for, I know that some of the bosses were very susceptible to, I don't know, wasn't there like a laser gun or something like that? Or
yeah, there's a laser, there's a grenade, there's a homing rocket, which I think is the best. Yeah, because
there's one of those fights that is like the second cannon dude, like the cannon tank dude, where like you couldn't really shoot him that well. Like you had to use like the homing lasers in order to actually reach the target that you needed to hit.
Some of them are clearly designed for the weapon that you just got.
And even with using save states, I had to start over a couple times because I soft locked myself out by like running out of a special ammo and not being able to beat the boss fight.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah, well, don't feel bad for me. I was using save states like a lot. So,
what are your thoughts about the music of this game?
So going into this game, you're talking about how great the music is and how much you were looking forward to talking about the music. And I remember listening to it, and it wasn't bad. I've heard worse, but
oh my god, I think it is excellent. I think it's one of the best soundtracks of all time when it comes to video game music, let alone being on the NES. It's just phenomenal.
Now, to be fair, I was probably, for the most part, I was listening to it out of tiny little speakers. So maybe when we're listening to it through the podcast, like it'll sound much better. But I wasn't really that impressed. It didn't really leave much of an impact on me.
That is something, because if you go to YouTube and you type in Journey to Silius, you see fewer YouTube videos of people doing their playthroughs and gameplay footage, and it's more of these random channels that just have this soundtrack up for people to listen to.
Man, I'll definitely check that out again. I'll take your word for it, and I'm sure you'll pick some bangers when you put them in the podcast.
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to try to throw every single track that this game has in there. So that's my goal for the end of this. Cory, why don't you tell me about your playthrough of Journey to Silius in 2024?
So my journey to Silius is not a wonderful journey, and I think you're going to be upset with me, Sean, because I was not impressed.
Whoa, okay. I'll wait. I'm willing to hear you out before I just lay into you.
So here's the thing. In terms of audio, I think we can agree. It's a very well done title. The music department is very good at their jobs. It's mid. It's just so it's like a mediocre title. And when I kept playing through this, I got very much the Mega Man vibes because it's very much like a jump and shoot man kind of title. I got a lot of Contra vibes out of it because it is like a Contra type of game. And the Mega Man portion of it more so comes from the really nice ability that they give you to just cycle through your weapons. So like a lot of these like run and gun type of games like Contra, like you'll pick up the floating power up or whatever, and that's the gun you're stuck with. And then you kind of just have to keep playing through until you can, swap it out with a different power up. This one is really nice because you get to bank your weapons, and then they all have like a limited ammo similar to Mega Man powers, and then they can be recharged by, I think, rare monster kills will recharge it, and then also when you beat the boss you unlock new powers and it also charges up as well. So there are ways to like keep that going and make it like a pretty useful system. So that's a positive. I said the music's a positive. So playing through this, it felt slow to me. And what I mean by that is when you look at a game like Contra's very much like a bullet hell. There's a lot of guys flying at you. There's a lot of crap on the screen. And maybe it's because I did spend like so much time playing Contra that I got the rhythm to it, and it became like a much easier thing for me to do. But this, in comparison, is like a much calmer, like slow pace to the game. And it was just kind of boring. Like, so, a lot of these, like, we listened to Chris talk about it earlier. A lot of these boss fights, I didn't find them challenging at all because you could just kind of stand there and not move, and you could just watch the bullets coming at you, and you had time to react. Like, if you're moving around a lot, this game probably seems a lot more difficult than it is. But if you stand still and just wait and just watch the screen, pretty simple. Like, it's not nearly as difficult as I think like it looks. So I was kind of having issues with it in that department. There's no plot to this whatsoever. And now that we know the history of it and the fact that it was like a Terminator game where they lost the licensing, it makes a lot more sense because the last boss is definitely a T-800. But even the bosses leading up to that have nothing to do with Terminator. And all the bosses are kind of like one mechanic opponents. So you'll have like the giant gold dude, for example. He's like a big gold tank. And what you have to do is you jump over the giant laser that he fires, and then he's got like a core that you have to hit. And what the trick is that he will constantly be closing a shield around the core. And so you basically just have to time it out to hit him in the core and kind of trick him into opening it up again. And so there's a bit of a sketchy thing there. We have to figure that out, except for the fact that there's a homing missile. So you can just stand on the ground and launch homing missiles at it, and the core's open. And then all you have to do worry about at that point is getting out of the way of the laser when the laser comes.
But that's Contra.
No, I know, but it's the fact that like Contra's got way more stuff coming at you, and it's a lot harder to time. This felt much slower in comparison. We're like, I had a laser coming every like 7 seconds. So I had ample time to just be like, switch to the gun, fire, 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 kind of game over. Like, and I'm not trying to detract from the title at all. I think it was well made, but the fact that they had no IP to put on it means that there's no plot to this whatsoever. It's very convoluted. The game starts with like there's a nuke that goes off, and then you find out about like your dad left you a floppy disk. Children of floppy disk is an old form of saving data. So we had these floppy disks, then we had CDs, and then we went on to like hard drives and USB sticks. Anyway, the point is that you get a floppy disk, and it's an old one too. It's like one of them like 8-inch big ones.
Yes.
So you get the floppy disk, and then your dad's got the info for you that you have to like beat up somebody. He's like, if I'm dead, you got to do my mission for me. You're not told what the mission is. And then your next thought process after reading about your dad's mission is, I'm going to get revenge. And then you just proceed to just kill a bunch of dudes. And then you fight a robot on a space station. And then the end credits is just like a satellite floating in space. And there's nothing. There's no text dialogue. They didn't like put anything. There's no thought process behind any of it. It felt very rushed. And I think, you know, like we were talking about that they lost the Terminator license. I think this game could have been a lot better if they had just polished it up a little bit and spent like 3 weeks coding in some just, you know, dialogue or something, because there's nothing to this plot wise. And I mean, there are other games that are like that. Contra's a great example, but Contra, you know, you're like a weird commando and you're fighting a bunch of like guys that are, you know, minions of some alien hive mind that you're trying to blow up. And there's a huge helicopter sunset thing at the end of the game. And there's some fun text at the back end of it, you know? So it's just like, I just think they kind of just, they had something good. And I think they just kind of lost the plot at some point. And it fell short of my expectations.
So I have a lot to comment on. And first, I do agree with you that the storyline is pretty threadbare. It's pretty bad. And I mentioned earlier in the history that the game was originally called Operation SSS, and this is in reference to the Silius solar system, which is where your character, Jay McRae, his father, the scientist, was working on colony number 428. And
yeah, and see, that's all in some manual somewhere, lost to history. I'll never see that. It's not mentioned at all in the game. You know your name is Jay because it's like Jay's dad is dead. But it's like they show you a grave after a nuclear explosion. And you're just like, what happened?
And that's a very fair point. And I get it. It wasn't good. It was not good. But like I said before, they had already completed an entirely different game and then had to go back through. And so now they're way behind on deadlines. They lost the franchise, they lost the license to Terminator. So that's going to cut a lot of their budget that they had already spent. So I can understand why they didn't or really couldn't go back and flesh out this world that they'd already created through the future war with Skynet. So yeah, I do get it.
And I mean, like, in terms of that, you probably have to bleep me here, but it's basically where they were just like, F it, just do it live. Just send it out the door as is, you know, like we'll figure it out and move along and see how it does in the market. And I'm sure for the time, like, it was a pretty solid contender. There's nothing wrong about this game. So all the controls are functional. It plays fairly smoothly. It's a little finicky in terms of switching the weapons around, in my opinion, where like sometimes the guns don't really feel different. The machine gun and the pistol, for example, the pistol fires very fast as it is. So, you know, there's a bit of a weird dichotomy there, but the game it's fine. There's nothing particularly like wrong with it. I just think that it's not a standout title.
To me, it's just it's the music that carries so much of this because I
Right.
love listening to it, and so I don't mind taking that extra time in the world and it being a little slower paced. Like you said, that with Contra, it's more or less a bullet hell where you have all of this going on around you. But here in Journey to Silius, it is a little slower. It is a little easier to time things out.
It's also incredibly short. This is what, 5 stages?
Yes. But again, I blame all that on the fact that they probably had
Yeah,
no development time.
I'm sure a lot went on the cutting room floor. There were probably a lot of things that were either like, this is clearly a copyright violation, we can't use this anymore type of situation.
Yeah, so I think the third stage has the most obvious remnants of the Terminator game, which we know for a fact that it once was, and a lot of the robots look like RoboCop, or one looks like a flying version of the ED-209, which is the giant mech that you see in RoboCop 2.
Yeah, one of them very much looks like it has the head from like the aliens from Alien, and if
Yeah.
it was like a robot version of that.
But the music in stage 3, it's so good. And I don't know where I would put this necessarily in a replay, but as I was reading the manual, there's a section called gameplay features, and it's only 2 sentences long, which again kind of points to that rush development title. And it says, in stage 3 and 4, you're exposed to a variety of enemy weaponry like laser launchers and cannons. And the background in stage 5 is so programmed to automatically scroll right to left that you are geared to be carried all along the predetermined moving route on the container inside the factory. Which is a super long way of saying that it's a typical sci-fi game of the era, and they included an auto-scroll level, which is not exactly groundbreaking stuff.
Yeah, and you know, more to my complaints as well is like, so every one of these bosses, except I think the T800 at the end, they're all also a black background. So every boss fight is just like this weird like orange platform with a boss and no background to it whatsoever.
I think the problem there is that it's such a large sprite that
Right, you
they
probably
couldn't
do much with it. And again, I mean, I think we also had that problem. Did the original Metroid have that problem with Ridley?
Well, the original Metroid had that problem as a whole because there is no background to any of it.
Okay, so
It's all black
okay,
everywhere.
Yeah, so I'm thinking the same thing then. Okay. Yeah, so that's probably, in my opinion, that was either something that was, again, cutting room floor, or that was probably just hardware of the time limiting it. But it's just one of those things where you kind of notice it, and then you start comparing it to things like Contra or Mega Man or any of the other, like, you know, Streets of Rage has kind of got the same feel to it as far as side scrollers and Ninja Turtles, things of that nature, and things of the era as well, because this was what, 1990?
Yes.
Yeah, so you're kind of pitting it up against systems like that as well.
And I get it. I think that for me, it's just such a solid piece. It's not the best of the best when it comes to the gameplay, but it's just the total package because it doesn't have stuff like the Castlevania knockback, which is such a damn annoyance in that game.
And I don't want to sound like I'm backpedaling here because I didn't really enjoy this, but let me say there's nothing functionally wrong with this game. They made a good platformer. The guns are functional. The enemies are fair and balanced. Even as far as like the robots in the ground and everything, when you land, there's little turrets that pop up. You have ample time to kind of deal with those. There's not like a lot of like quick reaction time where it's like, oh God, I'm going to get shot and thrown into a pit and die. Nothing horrible happens.
The only thing that like really kind of, I shouldn't say bothers me, but bothers me, and this is kind of looking at it as like from a design perspective. Obviously, I don't design video games, but I've played a lot over the last 40 years. And I found it really weird that you basically fight a mini boss and then immediately fight the end stage boss right after that. But that mini boss will give you the weapon that essentially is required to beat that boss.
Yeah, you really have no time to play with the grenade launcher beforehand, do you?
No, and that's kind of what I asked Chris. If he used those guns elsewhere, you don't really get a chance to use it in the level that you're in. But again, it's kind of like Mega Man like that for me, where I only use the Mega Blaster throughout the stages, and then I only use the boss weapons on the bosses.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the times I was either using the homing missiles or the grenade launcher at the end. And I was probably using the shotgun more, like just through the levels because of the spread. You could just kind of spray and pray and clear up a lot of the targets before you even had to think about them.
That's really interesting because I do not use anything other than like the standard pistol unless I'm fighting a boss.
When the pistol's perfectly functional for the bosses as well. Like there's no penalty to using the base gun throughout this entire game.
With your time, it does take your time up. And there's one boss, I cannot remember which stage it is. I think it is stage 3. Man, I'm talking about that stage so much. The one where there's just so many levels of cannons. You get that spread shot, and you can basically just kind of lay down in one section, and it arcs perfectly to the little orb.
Oh, you talking about the big gun wall?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the end of stage 3.
Yeah, so that is one stage where I definitely couldn't really use the pistol, but I mean, maybe if I, got good, but it certainly wasn't happening there.
That's when you just get out the rocket launcher and you just keep firing.
Yeah, just spam rockets. Well, the final boss was just dead easy. That is a complaint of mine.
The guy that walks towards you and then crouches down and then slowly punches. So all you have to do the entire fight is jump over him, run away, and open fire.
Yeah, it's just such a simple attack pattern.
It's very disappointing.
You crouch, you jump. Oh, you lay down. He punches at you. You jump up. Just rinse and repeat. That's it.
Well, especially because right before that was the giant spaceship that Chris was complaining about. And it's like, yeah, this is interesting. You have a boss that's the size of like 3 screens. So you have a phase where you can damage him. You shoot the cockpit with to try to break it. And then you have to wait. And there's this lengthy like puzzle portion of the game where you basically have to like jump, crouch to get through the thrusters in one piece. And then you rinse and repeat and go back to the fighting phase. And I thought that was a pretty interesting one as far as boss mechanics go. You really haven't seen much like that before, where you've got a big boss like that, where it's kind of like you have to wait. I thought that was pretty interesting. But yeah, then immediately afterwards you fight the robot, you just punch him and he dies.
Yeah, I think there were some novel ideas here, but it's the time. They didn't have the time to make the game that they wanted to. And I think if they did have that time, this would be an absolute masterpiece.
Right, and I think that kind of goes back to what I said, is that like functionally there's nothing wrong with this. I just think it's a lack of execution. Whether it is, time or funds or whatever the issue is, it came up short in a lot of ways for me.
And that's fair. So, Cory, thank you for all your thoughts. And for those of you out there, I'm going to cut in Chris's comments on his playthrough today. It may sound a little disjointed because we were having a discussion about the game before. So forgive me if it sounds a little weird, but I'm doing my best trying to splice this in.
It's fine. We got him on here, and he's going to have some thoughts for you people. Just sit back and enjoy.
With that said, let's take our last break, and when we come back, we're going to give our final thoughts on the game.
My final thoughts on this game is I was really glad to play it, and my schedule's been a little bit crazy lately, but like as anybody listening knows, like as far as all these retro games that we're playing, I love the short platformers, games that aren't 40 hours long and super in depth, and I like playing the games that remind me of when I was a kid playing a game where I could just stop it and walk away and then come back and replay it again later. And this was exactly one of those games. This was just like, just like Mega Man or even, I hate to compare everything to Mario, but, just one of those games where you didn't have to have a strategy guide on how to beat it. And you didn't have to, you definitely had to replay it a lot in order to get good at it. But this was a really fun pick that you had, and I was glad I played it, and I recommend it for anybody that wants a nice retro challenge. It was really cool.
Great point, Chris. I'm going to talk now. Anyway, my final thoughts. I kind of went on a large tangent just now about being disappointed with this game. That being said, they did a lot better job coding it than I could, because I don't know anything about making video games. There's nothing particularly wrong with it. If I were to get this for a Christmas present as a child, I'm sure I would have been very happy. However, am I championing this title? No. Do I want you to go out and play it? Not particularly. You listen to the soundtrack, but other than that, I got nothing for you guys. I'm sorry. I'm not impressed.
I am. And the standout for me was, and always will be the music, because it's just so good. So definitely, at the very least, check out the soundtrack like Cory said. The gameplay is pretty typical of the time, but it's well done. It's very solid. Doesn't have a lot of negative aspects that you see in other series. Like I mentioned, the knockback that you get in Castlevania would just become so frustrating. You don't have that. But with so few stages, they made sure that you got your money's worth out of the game by making the game hard as hell. But it's not impossible. It doesn't require that twitch muscle movement that a game like Battletoads does, but you will be dying a lot. And when I did die, I felt that it was a fair death. because it was an area that I didn't know well, I hadn't practiced much, and after replaying through a few times, I felt like a pro. That's what I really like about this game, because it does allow you to feel good about it very quickly. I love this game. I love the hell out of it. I wish it was a childhood game of mine, but I still feel like I have some great memories with it, regardless of the fact that I first got my hands on it in my 20s. I love Journey to Silius, and I hope that you check it out. That's going to wrap up our final thoughts. Our next game, and hopefully we'll get this back out to you much, much sooner than we did this episode. That game is going to be Super Return of the Jedi, a Star Wars title for the Super NES.
Yeah, Chris has informed me to mention Super, because if I say Return of the Jedi, it doesn't count.
Cory, thank you so much for taking this time. I know it's really late where you are.
That's fine.
It's not our normal day that we record on, but thank you, all of you out there. Thank you so much for listening to us, especially, like I said, my European brothers and sisters, and for all those of you elsewhere. I hope that this will bring you back to listening to us more. We're going to get on a new schedule once we kind of figure things out. And with that, thank you. We've been Superannuated Starman.
Bye. By the way, I was looking through Sunsoft's like list of games. God, they made a lot of garbage.
They did. They made so much trash, but
Just so many shitty titles on here.
they made a lot of good games
they
too.
did make like Lemmings and stuff, which is really impressive. And I think they had like Tasmania and other couple things on here too. But I was just looking through it and I was like, God, there's so many like just shitty like tie-in franchise ports.
Well, I think that those were made largely to keep the lights on while they did the things that they
I'm sure, like,
wanted to
yeah,
do.
because I'm sure Warner Bros. Was like, here's $100,000, make a shitty Superman game so we can sell the movie.
And it worked. I mean, who didn't
They did make World Heroes though, so I mean,
yeah, but who didn't buy those just god awful franchised licensed games back in the day?
yeah. I mean, like Bugs Bunny, Rabbit Rampage, like there's a bunch on here that just.
There's
a lot of like just like Warner Entertainment was throwing money at this company.
But their sound studio was phenomenal. The music is great, even if the games aren't. Like I mentioned before, Fester's Quest, that game sucks. But the soundtrack, have you ever listened to the soundtrack for that game?
Yeah, there's a lot on here, like, and it's really like their audio department that sells a lot of these.
I mean, back in the day, it was probably the brand.
Well, yeah, I mean, like,
today,
like, I mean, in terms of, like, yes, this is a quality thing. Like, yes, it's probably the audio department where you can look at it and go, yeah, this is fine. I mean, like, Duerksen is on here and a couple other things, too. But a lot of it is just like, yeah, here's another Looney Tunes title. Speedy Gonzales, Aztec Adventure for the Game Boy Color.
Ugh.
And then their Master Blaster title, like, that they keep just pushing on us.
Yeah, they keep coming back to that. I don't know why.
I think it's just their flagship game, and they really like it.
I mean, the first one was great, but I don't need so many other iterations.